Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of History Quest. This month we are on stop number 2 of our county museum tour, and we've come to New Ulm to visit the Brown County Historical Society. This is Ryan Heron. He's the curator of the museum here, and he's going to be giving us a tour. Ryan, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Welcome to the museum.
Thank you, thank you.
So today we're just going to go through the museum and kind of see the whole thing.
Excellent, excellent. Should we start?
Yes.
All right,
So we'll start right over here.
Perfect.
So the Brown County Museum here used to actually be the New Ulm City Post Office. It was originally designed in 1909, originally built in 1909 to 1910. The original design of the post office was a little more plain and more, American. And then when the post office submitted that plan to the people of New Ulm, they didn't like it. So they wanted something a little more Germanic. So this exhibit here is Becoming Brown County.
Okay.
It talks about the history and the formation of Brown County from prehistory all the way up to about 1900.
Interesting, interesting.
So right here we have a new donation to the collection. We recently received this mammoth tusk, and it was actually found here in New Ulm. It was found at the MR Paving gravel pit here in town. So it is estimated to be from about 10 to 12,000 years ago during the last ice age.
That is cool.
Yeah. So that's why, so this went up to the Science Museum of Minnesota for treatment after it was found. And then they brought it back and it was donated to us.
Cool.
So they think it's that young or that recent because it hasn't fossilized entirely yet.
That's so cool. Found here too.
Yep.
Awesome.
So this here is our prehistory section. Over here we have the land. So this section talks about the geography and the animal and plant life here in Brown County. So then we've got some fossils and some rocks from the county and the nearby areas. And then over here is our history of Native Americans within Brown County. So we have the prehistoric tools and then the Dakota who lived here in Brown County during the historic period. So this section is about the fur trade. So it kind of bridges the history between the Dakota and then our settlement period over there. So then these maps here kind of show the establishment of the Minnesota Territory and the initial part of European settlement. And then this way begins our actual settlement by the European settlers. So we've got different ethnicities here. The largest ethnicities who settled in Brown County. Something that a lot of people may not be aware of, we have a lot of Bohemians here in Brown County. So Bohemians were from kind of the southwest or southeast of Germany and then northwest of what is now modern Czechia or the Czech Republic. And then of course we have our German section over here.
There was a few of those around.
Yes, there were quite a few Germans around here. So this TV talks about the towns and townships that were in Brown County. So we've got all of the modern day towns and cities as well as the ghost towns that we're able to find. So then you can just tap on any one of them, like Milford here, and then we have a little bit of history about each one.
I'm jealous.
So this section is more of our traditional history of the county. So it talks about the transportation with the roads and the railroads. And then the depots of Brown County are kind of a big thing, especially the Sleepy Eye Depot, which there's a picture of it over there. Kind of obscured by the train in front of the depot, but the Sleepy Eye Depot was a really big deal for the town. The primary industry in Brown County back then and today is and was agriculture, like most parts of Minnesota. And then our educational history. And interspersed throughout the museum, we do have iPads that visitors can use. So like this iPad here has all of the locations of all the rural schools that were in Brown County. We don't have history on each one of them, but if people have photos or know something about them, we encourage them to come in and talk to us and share that history with us. So then over here we have our industrial section with the largest industries in the county. And two of the three that we have here are very deeply tied to agriculture. So we have flour milling and then brewing on the right.
You telling me that they brew beer in New Ulm?
Oh yeah, it was a big deal. I don't know if that's news to you.
We know where our next stop is.
The Shells Brewery. So we tried to pick out the industries for the three largest towns in Brown County. So we've got the Sleepy Eye Flour Mill, which sold flour all over the country, and then the Oaks Brickyard over in Springfield, and then of course Shells Brewery, which was here in New Ulm. So then in this giant display case, we have it set up like it's the store window of a general store that you might see in downtown Sleepy Eye or New Ulm or Springfield. And then so we have items that would have been sold at one of those stores. And then over here in this corner, we come to the fun part of the exhibit, recreation. So we tried to pick out different things that the early settlers liked to do. So we have some sports equipment in there because they played sports, and a baseball uniform over in the corner. And then to go with the brewing, we have saloons. Mm-hmm. Plenty of saloons in Brown County. And then something that's a little more unique to New Ulm, the Turner's Society. The second floor of the museum is our rotating exhibit floor. So we change the exhibits out seasonally, and we're actually going to be changing this exhibit and our pottery exhibit over in the corner in the next couple of days. And then we have an exhibit in that corner, which is what's new, that features new artifact donations to the collection. So this is our Explorer's Corner. It is our more kid-friendly, hands-on room. So we've got some activities over there for kids to do. They can assemble a bison skeleton, or they can learn a little bit more about Native Americans. And then we have artifacts from the early settlers and the fur trade, and then Native Americans over here. This display case is to kind of show off the medals of Willibald Bianchi. So Willibald, or Bill, was a soldier in World War II, and he was with the Philippine Scouts over in the Philippines, and he received this Medal of Honor for his actions during the attack on the Philippines by the Japanese. So this is the third floor of our museum. When this was the post office, this was essentially the attic, and there was actually no floor here, just kind of a catwalk for the postmaster to come up here and observe the postal workers working down below.
Nice.
So this exhibit is Never Shall I Forget, a new look at Brown County and the US-Dakota War. So we originally did this exhibit in 2012, and then we sort of redesigned it last year for the 160th anniversary of the US-Dakota War. So that's why it's a new look. It's not like we're doing things totally different. We just wanted to freshen up the exhibit.
Okay.
So the exhibit starts over here. We first wanted to give visitors an idea of how the Dakota people lived in Minnesota prior to European settlement and prior to the treaties of 1851. So we have a model teepee. Of course, ours is much smaller than the original or the actual teepees would have been, because we couldn't fit an entire teepee in the museum, of course. And then we have a model of a bark lodge as well, because the Dakota lived in both teepees and bark lodges. So this painting depicts New Ulm in 1860. This painting was actually done in 1962 by Carl Fender, who was a local painter, but it was based on an 1860 map, or bird's eye view of New Ulm. And then over here, we have a map of Brown County as a whole in 1862. So we actually had this map as an older print that we sold. And so I took that older map and redesigned it using as much information as I could to show what Brown County was like in 1862. So there were really only 4 larger settlements in Brown County at the time. So there was New Ulm here, and then Milford, which is actually where the first settlers of New Ulm came back in 1854. And then there were Norwegian settlers down here in southeastern Brown County by Lake Hanska, which is still a very Norwegian and Scandinavian heavy area of Brown County today. And then there was Leavenworth here. So in this section of the exhibit, we talk about Brown County's participation in the American Civil War just prior to the start of the US-Dakota War. So like here we have August and Louis Schilling, who were brothers, who served in the 1st Artillery Battery of Minnesota. Then we talk about the start of the US-Dakota War and the murders at Acton, and then the council that was on the Lower Sioux Reservation that then led to the start of the war. And then we kind of take a break in the war when we start with August 18th and talk about Milford. So Milford was one of the early settlements of Brown County, and was one of the sites of the largest attacks on the settlers. And so the artifacts in this display case were found at Milford from the settlers' homes that were destroyed. And then this painting here is a depiction from artist David Geister in 2012. It shows an attack on a recruiting party. So on August 17th, there was a recruiting party in Brown County to try and recruit soldiers for the Civil War. And then on the morning of August 18th, they left New Ulm and then went to Milford to try and get soldiers for the Union Army. And while they were en route, they actually came across the Dakota attacking the settlers at Milford, and then were ambushed themselves. So then over here we have a map that shows the locations of the homesteads that were at Milford. And then this spot here, the ravine ambush, is actually what is depicted on the painting. So at least 50 people were murdered in Milford on August 18th. And then there were a number of survivors who hid in the trees along the Minnesota River, and other people fled back to New Ulm. And so between the recruiting party and then the survivors at Milford, they brought news of the attacks to the city. So then the settlement at Leavenworth was also attacked on August 18th. The next day, on August 19th, people in New Ulm heard about the attack and heard that there might be survivors down there. So they organized a rescue expedition to go and recover whoever they could. So this wagon here on display is one of the wagons that was part of that rescue expedition.
Oh, really?
And then we have a mannequin sitting in there that is supposed to be Luther Ives, who is shown here.
Okay.
He was the driver of this very wagon. So when the people in New Ulm heard the news about the attack at Milford, there were 2 leaders who really stood out. So there was Charles Roos, who was the sheriff of Brown County at the time, and then Jacob Nix, who was, he had served in the army back in Germany, so he had military experience here in the town. So those 2 really then organized the defense of New Ulm, because they fully expected that the Dakota were going to attack New Ulm, which they did on August 19th. So between hearing the news and the morning of August 19th, the town erected barricades in the center of New Ulm, around Minnesota Street. So the barricades ran just on the other side of the museum here, and then it went down Minnesota Street for 3 blocks.
Okay.
This is a reproduction of a painting that was done by Anton Gog, a local painter. It depicts the barricades outside the Schalk building, which was kind of on the opposite corner of the barricades from where we are now. And then it depicts the Battle of New Ulm. So in this display case, we have firearms that were supposedly used during the attack on New Ulm. And there were actually 2 battles. New Ulm was attacked first on August 19th, and then again on August 23rd. So all of the firearms in this case were supposedly used by the settlers. Of course, the Dakota would have had firearms themselves, but we don't have any from them. There is a war club and some arrows in here that were recovered after the battles that the Dakota would have used. In the days between the battles, the people of New Ulm kind of fortified the town more and shored up the barricades. Also, after the first battle ended, reinforcements came from St. Peter, and then other reinforcements came to New Ulm from Mankato and Lesueur as well. And they really helped defend the town. So right here is Charles Flandreau. He was one of the initial reinforcements, or he was among one of the initial reinforcements from St. Peter. And then when he got here, he assumed command and kind of took control of the defense.
Okay. I think in a lot of cases, they went out onto the countryside in small bands,
Yes.
small little war parties, and I think they were so hungry and they were so in need of supplies, and they could easily overrun a farm and take whatever flour, cornmeal that they needed, a handful of shot and powder,
Right.
and get fed and go on their way and go to the next one and be successful. Whereas if they would come to New Ulm or they go to Fort Ridgely, the people were fighting back.
Mhm.
And I think in a lot of cases it was like, no, we don't need that. We just want to,
Right. The Dakota were largely raiders, and that's how they fought. They didn't fight sustained battles. And so that's why they didn't really lose the battles of New Ulm and Fort Ridgely, but that's why they didn't take the town.
And Little Crow, I mean, even you read some of the stuff about him, he that's what he was looking for. And there was a big there was a big argument at one point, and I don't recall where it was. Actually, I think it was on the bluff by Fort Ridgely. There was a big argument. They were holding a council, and Little Crow wanted to band together and attack Fort Ridgely because Fort Ridgely had the weapons and the supplies and the cannons, and they needed those because he knew eventually the army's coming and you're going to have to fight against soldiers, not civilians. And the argument was that, but if we attack New Ulm, there's goods, there's plunder, there's gold, I don't know how much gold was there, but there's all kinds of more fun stuff, for lack of a better term.
Well, they had money.
Yeah.
The money was
right.
Yeah.
And anybody who says that the Dakota didn't care about money doesn't know what they're talking about. Everybody cares about money. They knew what money was. They wanted money. That's what caused the whole thing, was they weren't getting their money. But at any rate, the argument was to attack New Ulm first. And after because they attacked New Ulm and the first time and failed, and then finally regrouped and listened to Little Crow and attacked Fort Ridgely. But there again, they couldn't come together, and it was just kind of now let's go back to New Ulm.
So this painting was done in 2004 by Mike Eischen. It shows the Second Battle of New Ulm during the battle, and it actually shows a point in the battle that is known as Flandreau's Charge. So during the battle, the Dakota had kind of surrounded the town. They were advancing from the far end of the barricades, and then they were also in defensive positions here on this side of the barricades. And so Flandreau organized a charge of about 60 men to go out of the barricades and push the Dakota back. And it was successful, and the Dakota on this end of town retreated. So it prevented them from getting a defensive position and then even swarming the barricades. So the Second Battle of New Ulm began on August 23rd in the morning, and it lasted for about a day, but most of the fighting took place on the 23rd itself. So then the following day on August 25th, the military leaders like Flandreau and Nix and Ruse decided to evacuate New Ulm. And so the people dismantled the barricades because much of the structure of the barricades was actually composed of wagons. So they had to tip the wagons back over, and they put the wounded and the women and the children in the wagons and then headed to Mankato. So after the retreat from New Ulm, the US military, led by Henry Sibley, really got involved. Now, they had been involved since the start of the war. Immediately after the attack on the agency, soldiers from Fort Ridgely headed out to the Redwood Ferry and were ambushed by the Dakota. So that was on August 18th. However, by September, Henry Sibley was organizing an army to go out and fight the Dakota. And so he fought 2 battles with them. His men fought 2 battles with them. The first was at Birch Coulee, where they were ambushed by the Dakota in what was a decisive defeat, essentially, for the army. And then Sibley and his army fought another battle at Wood Lake, which effectively ended the war. So after the Battle of Wood Lake, the Dakota who had been involved in the fighting largely fled to Canada or the Dakota Territory. And then there was essentially a peace camp that remained at Camp Release. And so Sibley arrested many of the Dakota and then shipped them to an internment camp at Fort Snelling, which is depicted there in that painting. And then, of course, prior to then being sent to Fort Snelling, there were trials to determine which of the Dakota men had fought in battles and had killed settlers.
The sad part I always thought was, so when Sibley goes in to the upper reservation and starts making arrests, the bulk of the warriors who were taking part in this had fled with Little Crow.
Oh yeah.
And it was the people in the upper reservation that actually had gone in and kidnapped the refugees or the prisoners.
Yes.
And bring them over, and then tells Little Crow and his men, basically when they come back, get out of here. I mean, they were ready to go fight, fisticuffs and bullets with the Lower Sioux, warriors that were out there. And so they leave, and a handful of them stay behind thinking, well, maybe we can sneak out of trouble here if we stay with the upper reservation.
Yeah.
So when Sibley has his tribunal and condemns, what was it, 300?
303.
Initially? 303 to hang, it's like most of them had nothing to do with it. Some of them were just present or near a battle.
Yep.
And the people, and they move them away from the upper reservation. And this is a part that I always struggle with a little bit. When they go through, is it New Ulm or Mankato where the baby is killed?
So there's 2 different things that happen there. So the warriors who had been sentenced to execution actually traveled through New Ulm on their way to Mankato.
Okay.
And so in New Ulm, a mob actually attacked that caravan. And a number of the men were injured, and one later died from his wounds.
And then,
then the baby actually happened with the larger group who were being sent to Fort Snelling. They went to Henderson, where they were also attacked by a mob, and then a baby ended up being killed.
I think part of the maybe an angle to look at it that people miss is that had they just left the Dakota up on the upper reservation and said, even the people that had nothing to do with it, had they just left them there and turned around, they would have been slaughtered up there. You would have had mobs with just like what happened when they traveled through, and they were attacked by mobs. And that was also part of why there was the escort with them. It wasn't just to make sure that nobody from this group of Dakota attacks anybody. They're not going to attack anybody at this point. Everybody knows that. They've got nothing left. They've thrown their hands up. They say, save us from this mess, I think is what a lot of them have in their mind at that time. The Army's with them to keep white settlers from attacking the Dakota. And actually, even when they get into the internment camp, which was a horrible conditions in that camp, but they were actually, you could get a pass to come and go from the camp. So it's not, I'm not saying that they were treated fairly in the camp or anything like that, but I think there's a part of the story that people nowadays miss. And it's like they are there also to be protected. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there was a lot of skepticism while keeping an eye on them to make sure nothing happens, just because of the attitude at the time. But I think it's important not to lose sight of the fact that it's like they're also protecting them from, the other victims out here. And it's a shame that when it comes to the Dakota conflict, Sioux Uprising, however you want to term it, that the big picture gets ignored largely through the whole thing. The big picture gets ignored, and all we do is try to justify one side or the other. That's all I have to say.
Well, and that's actually what we tried to do in the remake of this exhibit, is to look more at the big picture. A lot of our older exhibit in 2012 was really focused on Brown County and New Ulm. And so with the remodel, we wanted to explain the entire war. So from its beginnings in 1851 or earlier, all the way to beyond the war into the 1870s and 80s.
Well, I'd say this exhibit up here, at least to me so far, has been the most compelling. I mean, just something that everybody, if you're coming to the Brown County Historical Society, should definitely come up here and check out.
So then within about a week after they had evacuated New Ulm in August of 1862, people started coming back and returning home. Now, some people never came back home. They were just too affected and too traumatized by the war and the people they lost. But many people did come back. So then this is a map of New Ulm in 1870, and it shows that the town had really recovered. So by the end of the second battle, there were only about 60 buildings left standing out of roughly 240. So 3/4 of the town was burned. But here you can see the town has been rebuilt. It has recovered, at least physically. The people had kind of recovered economically because the railroad came in 1872 and really bolstered or boosted the town's economy. But of course, many of them had been affected by the loss of loved ones, and they'd never recovered from that. So this cannon is something that's pretty special to New Ulm. It was sent by the Cincinnati Turned Rhine. Some of the initial founders of New Ulm were Turners, who came in 1857. Early founders, I should say. And so in 1863, the Cincinnati Turned Rhine sent this cannon here. They had heard about the attacks on New Ulm, and they sent it so that the town could defend itself if it were ever attacked again. So that led to the founding of the New Ulm Battery, which still exists today.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much for bringing us around the museum. I've got to say, this is a gem of the state. This is great what you guys have here, and everybody out there from McLeod County, when you get tired of our museum, which I hope you don't, mosey on down this way and take a look, because this is great. So thank you again very much.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. You're welcome.
And on that, we'll see you next month when we head to the Stearns County Historical Society in St. Cloud, Minnesota.